So we're going to talk introduction of rhetoric in the digital age. So one of the first things that Andrews jumps into, and this is a long debate in English studies, is what is literacy? So if you go, I'm pointing out my window, if you go outside and you ask just a general person that you stop on the street, most people would say, well, it's being able to read and write. But being able to is a really broad category. Do I need to be able to read Jane Austen? Do I need to be able to read the newspaper? Do I need to be able to read an election ballot? All of those are written differently. In this day and age, because of technology, do I need to be able to read the terms and conditions before I agree to create an account, or before I agree to open up all of the OS stuff on my phone? I just had to update all of that. So I was reading terms and conditions. What does be able to read mean? And then usually if we're testing that, we need to be able to produce something. And so that's where what Andrews is really looking at, and we talked about this a little bit with the last chapter, especially towards the end, is literacy has become this be able to produce the right effect. And so then what happens is we start to tack all of these words on top of it. So I'm gonna, just because it's right here, I've done that, right? Information literacy. I am absolutely one of the people who has done what he's arguing, where he's like, this works, but it's not getting us where we need to be, which is rhetoric. And rhetoric is an umbrella term. All of these literacies would fit underneath it, but rhetoric would allow us to build an overarching theory of practices and understanding of ways of thinking, and then pulling together and or mapping the trends. So how does information literacy, and the big one for me is always information literacy and media literacy. To me, especially if we've Venn diagrammed them, they are almost entirely overlapped. So what are the differences and what are the similarities? What are the trends? What are the patterns? What are the mirrored practices? And why are they different? And because they are different and different fields use those different concepts, why? What is the social power there? What is the political power there? And this is getting at his question, what might we lose if we get rid of that discussion altogether? But also, how can rhetoric as the umbrella concept help us ask those difficult questions more effectively, and then pull in those different pieces? So what are the historical foundations of information literacy? What are the historical foundations of media literacy? And then again, what are the trends? What are the patterns? What are the overlapping practices? And who's left out? So now we're into his part two. If we go back to his 4 parts of his definition. So who's left out? Who has political power? Who has the most to gain? Who has the most to lose? We can really politically and socially situate these two concepts. What should K-12 education do about them? What should higher education do about them? If you're a biology major, should you understand them the same as an English major? If you are an education major, should you understand them the same as an English rhetorician? Those are like the really big questions in part 2 of his definition. And then we can start bringing in the multimodal. So when we say media literacy, do images and videos fit under media literacy? But what about a video like this, where it's informational, especially for class? Is this media literacy or is this information literacy? And so that's where the multimodal piece complicates it further. And it's being, especially we start to bring in the rest of his understanding or his discussion from this chapter, it's being transcribed from me standing in my office doing my thing into my iPad that I'm using to create it. And then I have to put a bunch of tags and codes on it so that the technology on my iPad understands, and so that I interfacing with the technology on my iPad understand what this is, what this little tiny packet of information is. And then I have to take it from my iPad and put it up onto YouTube, and then I connect it from YouTube into D2L, because that is the best interface to get it to you and to get it the most, in my mind, accessible to you all. What are those intermediaries? How do those intermediaries change the coding behind the scenes? And once I pop it into a place in D2L, how does its lived experience there in D2L change how you understand it? But I'm going to complicate that further. Like, it should help the information literacy piece more, but if the video doesn't play and you use the hyperlink and you go to YouTube, you now have ads. And is that distracting? And so we have all of these complicated pieces where I can break it down with media literacy, I can break it down with information literacy, but teasing the two apart needs something else. And that's where Andrews is like, that's what I'm talking about with rhetoric as this overarching theory that pulls all of these ideas together. So we're not trying to lose literacy, because we are worried about what we will lose if we completely get rid of the concept. But rhetoric gets us a little bit more. So these ideas of literacy can roll up to rhetoric and just be underneath the concept. So the whole introduction is getting at that so that he can get to, because digital reading practices look different. Digital production practices, which is / writing, look different. If I am writing to my English majors and I'm doing it through Instagram, I am using a combination of colors and words and images and hashtags within a space where I keep directing my students so that they get easier access to the information that I want to share with them. But then it's, somewhere in their feed and the algorithm gets to have a say in it. All of that is variations of translating the message and using rhetoric. But literacy is not enough to help me understand all of the practices in combination and in circulation with each other. I can understand them as separate literacies that are epically overlapping, but then situated within like these larger systems, I need something bigger, which is where he's getting at. Rhetoric needs to be not necessarily digital rhetoric, although we're going to call it digital rhetoric to make it a little bit easier for us. So then what does that theory look like? What is digital rhetoric? That's where we're headed for the whole rest of the semester. And it starts with this page. It starts with page 155 in this chapter. So as you're going through this, if you have questions, send me an email or stop by office hours.